Come along on my quest. We've got killing to do, where revenge will be yours and ours and mine, 3 Klingons and you. Let's all jump on a ship, find that fiend we all knew, and we'll fly out in space to smash his face, 3 Klingons and you. You'll see that wrath is an art, then we'll cut out his heart and make stew. Vengeance is overdue, 3 Klingons and you. I guess I'm committed to the bit for the rest of this batch now, aren't I? Fuck. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Blood Oath. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know how many of these old Klingon bastards make it out of this episode alive, if any, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. It was in the final quarter of season 2, and the producers of Deep Space Nine said to the audience, okay, you want Klingons? We'll give you Klingons. And then they did. And that's what this episode was, and now I'll tell you about what happens in it. Quark calls the cops on a Klingon who refuses to leave the holosuite. Odo shows up and tells Quark to cut the power. Quark's like, but he said if I cut the power, he'll kill me. Odo's like, I'm good with that. Quark cuts the power. A moment later, the very drunk Klingon forces the door open and staggers outside, ready to kill Quark for interrupting his fun. But Odo steps in like, hey, guess what? You won the battle, and everybody wants to throw you a party with cake and blood. And the old Klingon's like, well, lead the way, my smooth-faced friend. You know, I used to have a smooth face too. Not that smooth, but anyway, it's a long story and definitely not worth telling. A bit later, another old Klingon shows up in Odo's office. He announces himself as Koloth, and he's come to bail out his friend in the drunk tank, whose name, it turns out, is Kor. But when Koloth sees how sloshed Kor still is, he gets mad and tells Odo to just keep him. Later in Ops, Odo is telling Kira about the drunk-ass Klingon named Kor he's got locked up, and Dax overhears and says, was the friend who came to bail him out named Kang? Odo's like, no, it was the other one. Dax goes to the brig, where Kor is still failing to sleep it off. She says, hey, Kor, do you remember your old friend Curzon Dax? Kor's like, Curzon Dax? Hell yeah, that's my boy. Whatever happened to him? Dax is like, he died and they cut out the slug in his belly and put it in my belly, so I'm Dax now. Kor's like, fuck off. Dax is like, if I wasn't really Dax, would I know about that scar you have on your rib? Or that you carry around one of those little fart noise makers to cover for the fact that you're always actually farting? Kor's like, it's really you, Curzon, my old friend, and he gives her a hug. She's like, I'm Jadzia now. And Kor's like, oh, right, Jadzia, my old friend. I'll just call you Jadzia from now on because that's your right name, and I'd be a total asshole if I tried to make an issue out of it. Woke? Why'd Star Trek have to go woke by showing characters treating each other with basic respect? Dax gets Odo to release Kor, and they go and find Koloth on the promenade, about to enjoy a piece of cake. I don't see any blood, though. They must have been out. Dax explains to Koloth the bit about how she's the new host of the Dax symbiont and carries all of Curzon's memories and yada yada yada. And Koloth is like, oh, well, this is an unexpected wrinkle. Kang must not have known about this. Kang walks in like, no, I did not know about this, but never mind that now. I've brought us all together for one reason. I have finally found the albino. Oh my God, did you hear that? He's found the albino. Who is that? What does that mean? The 4 of them convene somewhere more private. Dax offers drinks to everyone, but only Kor, that drunken shit, takes one. Dax explains to Kang about the I used to be Curzon thing, and it turns out that Curzon Dax swore a blood oath with these 3 Klingons to seek revenge on this guy, the albino. That was 80 years ago. The albino has been on the run from them all this time, but now Kang has finally learned the location of the albino's compound, and he's gotten the band back together so they can finally take their revenge. Kang's like, we'll find the albino, and I'll cut out his heart and eat it while he watches with his dying breath. And Koloth is like, yeah, that's some real Klingon shit right there. But you can't play, Dax. You're a girl now. Kang and Dax take a walk, just the two of them, and Kang tells her, look, I know all about trills. Curzon was my buddy. The next host doesn't carry the obligations of the last one. You're released from the blood oath. Jadzia says, but I still feel the commitment to the oath that Curzon felt. You chose Curzon to be the godfather to your son. That's a big deal. A Klingon choosing a non-Klingon to be the godfather? I want to honor the oath. Kang's like, nah. Later, Dax is back at work, and Kira asks her about some malfunction she detected, and all of a sudden Dax is like, Kira, how many people did you kill? Kira's like, what? Why? What have you heard? Dax says, in the Resistance, I mean. Kira's like, oh! A bunch. Why do you ask? Are you planning on killing someone? Seriously? Jadzia, I know Julian can be a little pushy, but there must be some other way. Dax explains to Kira about the blood oath Curzon took. 80 years ago, the albino was the leader of an infamous gang of space pirates who raided Klingon outposts. 3 ships, commanded by Kor, Koloth, and Kang, were sent to stop him. They succeeded in capturing most of the albino's men, but the albino got away. A few years later, he took revenge on Kor, Koloth, and Kang by killing each of their firstborn sons. They swore a blood oath of vengeance against the albino, and because Curzon Dax was the godfather of Kang's son, he swore the oath as well. Dax says, I know it was Curzon and not me, and I know I'm not bound by his oath, but I feel like I am. I feel like I owe it to Curzon. Kira's like, well, if you're asking me what it's like to kill someone, when you take the life of another, you lose a part of your own as well. And it's totally worth it. It'll be the most incredible rush you've ever felt, especially if they really have it coming. God damn how I miss it. So now Dax has to convince the Klingons to let her join the revenge quest. Kor is all for it right away. He's like, shit yeah, you should totally come. It'll be a fun time. We're gonna kill so many people. Koloth says no at first, but then Dax has a sword fight with Koloth's stunt double, and even though she loses, she impresses him enough for him to change his mind and say yes. Kang is still holding out, so Dax says to him, you're worried about being responsible if I come along on this quest and get killed, but that's just putting your honor above mine and denying me my right for vengeance. And no true Klingon warrior would do that. Only a wrinkled old pussy. Is that what you are, Kang? A wrinkled old pussy? Fuck you, pussy. Kang's like, you really think that by insulting me and trying to piss me off, you'll get me to change my mind? Dax is like, yes. Kang's like, well, you're right, it worked. Okay, fine, join the kill party. Dax is in her quarters packing for her trip when Sisko walks in like, hey, so on your request for a leave of absence under reason, you wrote revenge killing? What's the deal there? Dax is like, it's a Klingon thing. Curzon swore a blood oath, etc., etc. Sisko's like, but you're a Starfleet officer. You're talking about murdering someone, or at least being an accessory to murder. If I ever did something like that, I'm not sure I could live with it. Or maybe I could. Sisko doesn't stop Dax from going, so we cut to the 4 of them on a Klingon ship on the way to the albino's place. They go over their battle plans. Kang's strategy seems designed to get them all killed, which is fine by Kor and Koloth, but Dax is like, hey, maybe we could try a few things that might allow us to actually win and not just get honorably hacked to death by the albino's guards. Kang comes clean and admits that the albino knows they're coming. Kang made a deal with the albino to settle their feud once and for all. Kang, Kor, Koloth, and Dax will face off against 40 of the albino's best people, and whoever wins, wins, and that's it. Kang agreed, figuring it was their last chance for vengeance, and if they can't kill the albino, at least they can die trying. Dax says, okay, but what if the albino, noted criminal and child murderer, is lying to you about the terms he set out? What if there's gonna be way more than 40 people there? Maybe I can do a technobabble thing from the ship to disable everyone's phasers. That should tilt the odds a little more in our favor. Kang's like, okay, nerd, go ahead and do that. They arrive at the planet and gather outside the perimeter of the albino's compound. It turns out the albino was being slightly treacherous with Kang. Dax's tricorder detects a mine buried at the entrance to the compound. Apparently, the albino's plan was less honorable combat and more blow up the Klingons. They figure out their approach. Dax will blow up the albino's armory to cause a distraction, while the others take out the power station to shut down the albino's surveillance equipment. So they do that. Dax walks up behind a guard and says, hey, good looking. You know where the can is? I need to cash in some shit tickets. And then she knocks him out with one punch because villains are weak and helmets are useless. And Kang, Kor, and Koloth shut off the power to the compound, and the albino kind of freaks out and deploys his troops like, no, don't let them get me, don't let them get me. But all of a sudden, there they are. Kang, Kor, Koloth, and Dax, goofy Klingon swords at the ready, and Kang bellows to the albino, look upon your executioners, killer of children. That's not a bad line. He must have settled on that one ahead of time and practiced it. I don't think I'd be able to come up with something that good off the top of my head. I'd be walking in there like, time to die, shithead. Or, surprise, motherfucker! Or, who has 2 thumbs and is about to kill you? This guy, only I can't point at myself right now because I'm holding a sword with both hands. They fight. Dax and the Klingons kill a bunch of the albino's goons. Koloth gets stabbed and dies. Kor gets stabbed but doesn't die, bad motherfucker that he is. And also, how's a stab wound gonna kill him at this point? What's he gonna do, bleed out? His blood is mostly alcohol anyway. Finally, Kang and the albino face off. The albino gets the better of him and stabs him, but then Dax comes up and holds their sword to the albino's throat. The albino's like, go ahead, do it, kill me, then cut out my heart and eat it, num num num, ugh! And then Kang stabs him in the back and kills him. Kang's like, thanks for saving the death blow for me. Today was a good day to die, and then he dies. Only Dax and the wounded Kor remain standing. Kor's like, well, I'm starving. Who's ready for some heart? Dax returns to DS9, takes up her post. Cisco gives her a look, but doesn't say anything. Kira gives her a look too, and also doesn't say anything, but she's looking like, right? What did I tell you? Dax looks back like, hell yeah. The end. Do you think she ate the heart? I think she ate the heart. It would have been rude not to, right? She spends the whole episode like, I'm gonna honor the blood oath I made in my previous life. I'm ride or die. Let's do this Klingon style, baby. And then Kor hacks open the albino's chest and passes her half the heart, and she's like, oh no, none for me, thanks. No way in hell. She went caveman on that shit. As was also the case with the previous episode I reviewed, TNG's Heart of Glory, which was the first appearance of Klingons other than Worf in that series, there was a ton of anticipation for this episode, Blood Oath, leading up to its original broadcast. The thing we were most curious about when we heard that Kor, Kang, and Koloth, the 3 most prominent Klingon antagonists from Star Trek the original series, were appearing on Deep Space Nine, played by their original actors, was how was it going to work? What would they look like? How would they act? Why would they even be on Deep Space Nine in the first place? This was 1994, remember, when legacy characters played by legacy actors showing up on a Star Trek show, while not unprecedented, was still a novelty instead of the basis for multiple entire series. As it turns out, Kor, Kang, and Koloth being the 3 Klingons from TOS doesn't really matter for the story, and is mostly just an Easter egg, which is as it should be, and is something the writers of modern Trek shows would do well to remember. This isn't a 30 years belated episode of Star Trek the original series produced under the banner of Deep Space Nine. This is a Deep Space Nine episode that stands on its own, apart from TOS. Kor, Kang, and Koloth all have personalities and motivations that are established in this episode. If you happen to know that they were previously in classic Trek, it's a nice little bonus, but the episode does absolutely nothing to draw attention to that. There are no references to Kirk, or the Enterprise, or Organia, or Tribbles, or any other explicit connections to the lore, wank, wank, wank. There's also no acknowledgement of the altered appearances of Kor, Koloth, and Kang from when they were in classic Trek. They look the way they look here, with long hair and forehead ridges, because that's the way Klingons look in this series, period. No explanation necessary. Shit, can you imagine if a Star Trek show actually explained why the Klingons in TNG and Deep Space Nine look different than the Klingons in classic Trek? How fucking pointless would that be? Jesus Christ, that would be awful. How embarrassing if that happened. Did that ever happen? This episode is crafted to stand or fall on its own as an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and it works. It does stand on its own as itself as an episode of this series. It doesn't need to lean on nostalgia or fan service because it's actually good. The creators of the episode understood that the presence of Kor, Kang, and Koloth was already an act of fan service, and anything beyond that would be excessive. So Kor, Kang, and Koloth are what we get, and they, as they are here, are more than enough. Kor is the washed-up old has-been, drowning his sorrows in wine, losing himself in holodeck recreations of his past victories, and trying to impress people, especially younger women, with his credentials. Koloth is living in defiance or perhaps denial of his advanced age, still practicing his skills like a young warrior. And Kang is the haunted, heartbroken father, ready to give his life and those of his friends in one last try to avenge the death of his son. The three actors playing the Klingons all seem to be having a good time, and they all turn in good performances. William Campbell as Koloth is probably the weakest. He seems stiff and uncertain much of the time. Then again, of the three, Koloth is the least essential to the story and seems mostly to just be along for the ride, so maybe Campbell didn't find as much in the role to really sink his teeth into as he would have liked. Or maybe he was just rusty. This was his first on-screen role in 7 years, and his second to last one ever. Still, there are moments throughout the episode when Koloth is reacting to being insulted or is flustered by the behavior of one of his companions, usually Kor, when the old William Campbell charm reappears, and in those moments he really shines. As Kang, blessedly without the borderline blackface makeup he wore in his classic Trek episode, Michael Ansara brings his impressive, commanding presence to bear and gives what might be the most challenging performance of the three, because Kang keeps so much inside. Kang is the most burdened of the three Klingons. He carries the weight of his grief, his need for revenge, and now also his responsibility for allowing Dax to join the quest, even though he's clearly uncomfortable with bringing her along on what he expects will be a one-way trip. Ansara puts all of that across while doing very little, letting his eyes and his inimitable voice do most of the work, and he makes it look easy. But really, the best performance is the one by John Colicos as Kor. With a twinkle in his eye and a devious smile nearly always on his lips, Colicos plays this older, broken down, debauched version of Kor as a cross between a lusty, past his prime pirate and Shakespeare's Falstaff. He's loud and theatrical and demonstrative and anything but subtle. He's perfect. He's everything I could ever want out of a Klingon character. However, in singing the praises of the guest stars, let me not neglect Terry Farrell as Dax, who turns in a terrific performance her own self. This isn't just a Klingon episode, this is a Dax episode, and it's one of the best ones. Even though the Klingons are the reason the episode exists, it's really Farrell as Dax who carries the episode. Most of the episode isn't taken up by their vengeance ride to the Albino's ranch, but by Dax trying to win over the Klingons to allow her to join them while also grappling with her own sharply conflicting feelings. Tying the arrival of the three old Klingons to Dax is a very clever way of justifying their presence on the show, and the creators of this episode very smartly anchor that connection between Dax and the Klingons in character and emotion rather than plot. Dax knows that she's not obligated to uphold the blood oath taken by her former host, and Kang tells her as much, but she still feels that loyalty that Curzon Dax had to the Klingons, particularly to Kang, and she still carries the grief and anger from the death of Curzon's godson, or as she says more than once, her godson. Farrell shows us all of that. The conflict, the uncertainty, the wrestling with her own identity, the determination to prove herself to these old Klingons who don't remember her the same way she remembers them, and I think it's one of her best performances. It's also a milestone episode for the development of Dax's character, one of several we get in Season 2 of Deep Space Nine. We see another example of how multifaceted she is, how those various sides of her personality combine and work together, and how complicated it can be to reconcile the life she's living with the lives she's led. Now, all of that makes this sound like a heavy episode, but it's really not. There are some heavy moments and some very serious themes and emotions being dealt with, but for all the talk of blood oaths and murdered children and the moral gravity of taking a life, it mostly plays as a fun revenge story. It's not lighthearted exactly, nor is it overtly goofy, but despite the serious subject matter and the brutal ending, it ends up being kind of a romp. And I dig that. Some of the Klingon stuff is a little goofy, which, again, I dig because I think Klingon stuff should always be at least a little goofy because, Klingons. Aside from Kor's antics and the sniping that flies back and forth between the three Klingons and Dax, one of my favorite bits is when Dax fights Koloth in the holosuite. She asks the computer for a batleth and gives the exact measurements. Tip to tip, 116 centimeters. Weight, 5.3 kilos with an exterior hand-gripping diameter of 5 centimeters. Blades, composite baconite. And Koloth hears that incredibly precise technical description and immediately nods and says, "Ah, a warrior's configuration." Well, it would be, wouldn't it? I don't usually comment on this, but I'd also like to shout out the costume design for this episode by Robert Blackman and Abram Waterhouse. The costumes for the three Klingons are excellent and much more creative than we typically get from Klingon characters. Only Koloth wears the familiar Klingon armor. Kor and Kang are dressed in what I take to be Klingon civilian clothes. And when she leaves with them on the revenge quest, Dax changes from her Starfleet uniform to a different outfit that includes a jacket that kind of mimics the look of the familiar Klingon armor without being exactly that. It all looks really sharp, and the fact that they aren't dressed in uniforms, except for Koloth, which makes sense for his character, helps to visually reinforce the fact that their revenge quest is not official Klingon or Starfleet business. They're going rogue. As far as the plot goes, it's pretty straightforward. It does take them until almost the end of the episode to actually go to the Albino's compound and start their vengeance quest, but the interaction between Dax and the Klingons and Dax's assorted struggles leading up to the quest keep things from dragging along the way. The actual fight at the compound is also nothing to write home about, but it's quick and it's fun to see Dax, Kor, Kang, and Koloth dispatch a bunch of the Albino's enhancement talent. There is a clever and somewhat subtle bit of misdirection, which I appreciate. With how old the Klingons are, and all the talk of death, and Kang wanting to die, fighting for his son's vengeance, you probably expect that some or all of the Klingons aren't going to make it out of the episode. Kor especially seems like he's being set up for an honorable death. His drunkenness and generally depleted condition, as well as constant coughing and comments about his poor health, all seem to foreshadow his death, but it turns out he's the only one of the three old Klingons who survives. That's a nice reversal. The episode makes good use of Sisko and Kira in moving Dax's story along. It makes sense that Dax would ask Kira what it's like to kill people, given Kira's background as a resistance fighter and self-described terrorist, and the fact that at this point in the series, they've been establishing that Dax and Kira are becoming closer friends. And Sisko being concerned about Dax running off on a revenge rampage makes sense as her commanding officer and her friend. It's not relevant within the boundaries of this episode, but Sisko taking the moral high ground over the idea that Dax would condone, much less participate in, a revenge killing is kind of funny in hindsight, given how his character develops over the course of the series, but it fits with who he is at this point, and makes the extreme lengths to which he's willing to go to get the job done later in the series feel more significant in context. If anything feels overlooked or underdeveloped, it's the mentioned but almost completely unexplored fact that Kor and Koloth's sons were also murdered by the albino. Paying more attention to Kang's son is reasonable since that's Dax's point of connection to this, Curzon having been that child's godfather, but it feels a little odd that we're told Kor and Koloth lost their sons to the albino too, and neither one of them ever brings it up or seems all that upset about it. The impression given is that the whole revenge mission is about Kang's son. But what about Kor's son and Koloth's son? Are they chopped liver? Maybe. Klingons don't seem too worried about what happens to the mortal remains. It just feels like there should be a little more acknowledgement of that chopped liver. That's all I'm saying. Blood Oath was written by Peter Allen Fields, a veteran TV writer whose career began in the 1960s and who wrote for both Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and was also a producer for DS9's first 2 seasons. Besides this episode, he also co-wrote Half a Life and The Inner Light, 2 of the best TNG episodes, and wrote Cost of Living, one of the very worst episodes of TNG, and wrote or co-wrote 10 other episodes of Deep Space Nine, including Duet, For the Uniform, and a little piece you might remember called In the Pale Moonlight. Not a bad resume. The episode was directed by Winrick Colby. If you're a Trekkie who pays attention to the credits, I don't need to tell you who he is. One of the most prolific directors in the history of the franchise, directing a total of 48 episodes spread across TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. Other DS9 episodes he directed include Vortex, Our Man Bashir, and The Siege of AR-558. Not a bad resume either. Blood Oath is one of the high points of Deep Space Nine's generally underrated first 2 seasons. Most importantly, it stands on its own as a story about loyalty, loss, and regret, and ultimately as a righteously violent space adventure with good performances from all the principals. But it also provides a model for the creators of Star Trek shows of how to play in the sandbox of the franchise if they insist on doing that. It's an episode that centers on 3 legacy characters from a previous era, and yet it's free of excessive fan service, pandering references, and lore-obsessed jacking off, and wastes no time trying to evoke our nostalgia because it's more concerned with telling us a story. It's kind of impressive when viewed in the context of the modern TV and film landscape, where that is sadly becoming a lost art. Those are my thoughts on Blood Oath. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next week as I continue with this batch of reviews of Klingon-centered episodes from DS9. We fling ourselves to the Delta Quadrant to jump aboard the Starship Voyager for an episode from Season 6 of that show, an episode titled Barge of the Dead. See you next time for that one. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.